By mid-afternoon, the corridor outside my corner office felt charged, like the air before a storm. From behind the closed door, I could sense someone hovering there, hesitating. The new assistant, Sophie, I thought her name was, kept stopping, starting, then stopping again. Even without seeing her, I could hear the anxious rhythm of her shoes against the floor, too fast to belong to anyone calm. I exhaled sharply from my desk, irritation leaking out before I could stop it. A second later, the door creaked open. Sophie stepped inside with the caution of someone entering unfamiliar territory, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug as if it were a shield. Her grip was so tight her knuckles had gone pale. I sat back in my chair, the kind most people would kill to own, but today it felt less like comfort and more like confinement. I'd only been back from my honeymoon for a few days. A month abroad was supposed to soften me, reset me. Instead, jet lag clung to my bones, and the office felt louder, messier, and far more irritating than I remembered. My phone was pressed to my ear. "Ryan, stay home," I said, forcing patience into my voice. "Sleep it off. This place is already falling apart, without any help." I ended the call and let the pleasant tone vanish. Work didn't need warmth. It needed control. Sophie cleared her throat. "Ms. Thorne, your coffee." She sat down carefully on my desk. I took a sip. Instantly, my jaw tightened. I lowered the cup harder than necessary, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the edge. "Too hot," I said coolly, "and too sweet." I looked at her, unblinking. Is this really the standard now? Her face went ghostly white. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. It won't happen again." "Again?" I leaned forward. "Where's my itinerary? Are my travel arrangements confirmed for Switzerland? And I want every department head in a meeting in half an hour. Financials, forward planning, everything." The words came fast, clipped, efficient. Sophie froze, then scrambled for her tablet, fingers shaking as she tapped. "I'm still verifying schedule," she said, barely above a whisper. "And I couldn't locate your travel preferences. 30 minutes isn't much time. The reports aren't finalized yet." That did it. "Stop." I stood so abruptly the chair rolled back behind me. The silk at my neck suddenly felt tight, suffocating. I paced the length of the office, anger buzzing under my skin. Since the moment I'd returned, nothing had worked. Documents misplaced, deadlines missed, people unprepared. I turned back to her, the real problem finally crystallizing in my mind. Without another word, I grabbed the desk phone and punched in a familiar extension. "Human resources," I said, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I want Adrian Cross back. Immediately. His time off is over. If he's not standing in my office in 10 minutes, he's done here." I hung up slowly. Sophie stood silent, eyes wide, finally understanding that this wasn't about coffee at all. Whoever was on the other end of the line muttered something panicked, but I was already done listening. I ended the call with a sharp motion and turned toward Sophie. She looked like all the blood had drained from her body. "MMS Thorne," she started. I leveled her with a stare. "Why are you still here?" I snapped. "Do you think this is social hour?" She swallowed hard, clearly forcing herself not to retreat. "That's not it," she said quietly. I need to tell you something." She hesitated, then rushed the words out. "Mr. Cross came in earlier today. He submitted his resignation." For a moment, the world stopped. I turned slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever reality I was standing in. "Say that again." "He resigned," Sophie repeated, a little steadier now. "He said he's returning to his hometown. He's getting married. He won't be coming back." Silence swallowed the office. I stared at her, unmoving, my mind refusing to accept the sentence it had just processed. Then something twisted inside me. The shock melted away, replaced by something sharp and almost amused. I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it, light and dismissive. I dropped back into my chair, leaned comfortably against the leather, and picked up my phone. "Ryan," I said when he answered, amusement lacing every word. "You won't believe this. Apparently, Adrian has resigned." There was a pause. "Julianne," Ryan said carefully, "don't take it personally. He's worked with you for years." People do strange things when they feel overlooked. Oh, he knows exactly what he's doing, I replied, glancing out over the glass and steel skyline below, especially after our wedding. Ryan sighed. You think he's serious? I smiled, slow and confident. No, I think he's panicking. He'll be back in a few days. I ended the call and set the phone aside. The idea that Adrian could simply walk away was almost funny. Without the company, without my name backing him, what did he really have? A resignation and a romantic excuse. That was all. I wouldn't chase him. I'd let him sit with his mistake until he came crawling back. What I didn't realize then was that he wouldn't. By the end of that first day without him, the cracks started showing. The afternoon meeting unraveled within minutes. Numbers didn't match across departments. Slides contradicted each other. Someone couldn't even get the projector to turn on. My patience snapped. This is unacceptable, I barked, slamming a folder onto the table. You're all supposed to be professionals. No one spoke. Every executive in the room stared down at their notes like students afraid of being called on. When it was finally over, I stormed back to my office, only to find Sophie buried behind stacks of documents, her desk barely visible. Ms. Thorne, she said quickly, holding out a single page. This is the plan for your private dinner next week with Ms. Wagner. I need your approval. I skimmed it once, then looked up sharply. The Azure Room? Since when is that acceptable? She blinked. It's one of the most exclusive venues in the city. I also noted that Ms. Wagner has a seafood allergy, and her husband dislikes floral fragrances. I cut in coldly. He prefers pine and cedar. This arrangement ignores both. Sophie's shoulders sagged. The office felt tighter than ever, and for the first time, a quiet, unsettling thought crept in, one I refused to acknowledge out loud. Things had always run smoothly before, because Adrian had been there. The cologne, I added sharply, tapping the paper, is completely wrong. Didn't you even bother checking the client profiles? Sophie's composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled, and her words came out uneven. Ms. Thorne, all of that information was handled by Mr. Cross. His system access has been shut down, and we can't locate the files on the main server. I didn't want explanations. I wanted results. Then solve it, I said coldly, crushing the paper in my fist and tossing it aside. I don't care how. If this isn't fixed by tonight, I'll replace the entire assistant team. She bolted from the office, shoulders shaking. The door closed, and the silence hit hard. I yanked the scarf from my neck and slammed my hand onto the desk. The frustration had been building all day, and now it was unbearable. Every task felt heavier, slower, like trying to fight with both arms tied behind my back. Without thinking, I opened my mouth to call out his name. I stopped halfway through. Adrian wasn't here. I turned to my computer, searching through my private folders. Then my email. Empty. Everything that mattered. The annotations, the reminders, the client nuances only I cared about, was gone. He had always synced those details to me personally. Quietly, reliably, and now there was nothing. That was when the truth surfaced, unwelcome and sharp. Over 7 years, he hadn't just supported my work. He had woven himself into it. Every meeting I walked into prepared. Every trip that ran flawlessly. Every detail I never had to think about. I called it basic assistance. I'd assumed it was replaceable. I told myself to calm down. This was temporary. Inconvenient, nothing more. I straightened and dialed another number. Public relations, I said evenly when they answered. Reschedule the dinner with Ms. Wagner. Increase the gift budget. Apologize for confusion. Money and influence could smooth this over. They always had. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. Ms. Thorne, the PR director said, tension unmistakable in his voice. We have an issue. Go on. Ms. Wagner's office declined. They said her schedule has changed. The dinner is canceled. My grip tightened. Canceled? Why? They didn't explain, he admitted. Her secretary sounded displeased. The call ended. I stood motionless in front of the window as dusk surrendered to night, the city below flickering to life. That dinner wasn't social. It was strategic. A year of careful positioning. Gone over a single misstep. For the first time, Adrian's absence had a cost I couldn't ignore. I said his name aloud, barely more than a breath. Anger flared first, then something unfamiliar followed close behind. I pulled up his contact, thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't call. I refused to believe this was anything more than coincidence. I refused to bend. The hours dragged on. Long after most of the building went dark, my office lights burned on. Stacks of paperwork surrounded me, every page demanding attention. The new team had tried, but their work was scattered, inconsistent. I corrected everything myself. When the clock finally crept past 2 in the morning, I leaned back, pressing my fingers to my temples. The quiet was heavy, and for the first time in years, exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, and it wasn't going away. The office had gone unnaturally quiet. The steady murmur of the air system was the only proof that time was still moving. For the first time in years, that silence felt heavy, empty. I realized that no matter how late I stayed before, there was always a soft glow beyond my door. Always someone outside, alert, waiting. A cup placed beside me at the right moment. A file delivered before I even asked. On impulse, I stood and stepped out into the assistant area. The desk that used to belong to Adrian looked anonymous now. Bare, impersonal, stripped down to generic stationery. No trace of him. I opened a drawer. Nothing. Another one. Still nothing. As I was about to shut the last drawer, my hand brushed against something thin, hidden deep at the back. A notebook. I pulled it out and opened it. The handwriting stopped me cold. Clean. Precise. Familiar. Page after page was filled. Not with work notes, not with schedules, but with me. Coffee before morning meetings. Exact temperature. Dietary restrictions. Medication to keep on hand. Dates to avoid. Triggers I never mentioned aloud. Preferences I barely remembered forming. Things I disliked but had never explained. Things I loved but pretended not to care about. It was exhaustive, intimate, meticulous. I stood there frozen, fingers tracing the ink as if it might disappear. A pressure built in my chest, sharp and unwelcome. I had spent years believing I was transparent, predictable. Yet here was proof that someone had seen everything. Every habit, every weakness, and never once demanded acknowledgement for it. 7 years of quiet attention. 7 years of smoothing my path while remaining invisible. And what had I offered in return? Authority, distance, convenience, a place beside me that was never truly his. And then a wedding announced to the world. One he learned about like everyone else. My jaw tightened. I snapped the notebook shut and shoved it back into the drawer, harder than necessary. No, this meant nothing. It had to be deliberate. A final move. Something left behind to unsettle me, to pull at my conscience. I wouldn't let it work. I couldn't. I returned to my office and forced the thought away. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that while I stood surrounded by glass and steel, half a world away Adrian was somewhere entirely different. Later, much later, I learned he was in the hills overlooking the harbor, at a residence so quiet and expansive it felt detached from the city itself. The night air was warm. The pool lights cast ripples across stone. He sat at ease, dressed simply, scrolling through a guest list on his tablet. A woman sat beside him, composed and elegant, slicing fruit with careful precision. "Go ahead and remove Julianne Thorne," Adrian said calmly, eyes never leaving the screen. The woman, Celeste, paused. She studied him for a moment. "Do you still feel tied to her?" He shook his head. There was no bitterness in the motion, only clarity. "No, I just don't see a reason anymore." He looked out toward the distant lights of the harbor. Those 7 years were training. I learned what I needed to learn. Now it's time to move on. Celeste set the knife down and stepped closer, resting against him. "That kind of training must have cost you something," she said softly. Adrian didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "It taught me one thing. You can't change someone who refuses to see. And you should never let another person decide what you're worth." He turned to her then, his expression open, resolved. "My value was never hers to define. Celeste met his gaze and smiled, as if she were looking at someone who had finally stepped into his own light. Celeste's smile softened. She leaned in and brushed a kiss against his cheek. "You're right," she said lightly. "But now that the training period is over, wouldn't it be interesting to show your former boss exactly what kind of resume she overlooked?" Adrian's lips curved into a quiet smile, something sharp and amused flickering in his eyes. "Maybe," he replied, "though I'm not convinced she'd even meet the requirements to sit across the table." While he spoke those words under a sky filled with calm certainty, my world was unraveling piece by piece. The failed dinner wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the opening crack. European partners who had once returned calls within minutes suddenly became vague, evasive. Meetings were postponed. Promises dissolved into polite silence. But none of that compared to what happened next. Project Falcon. It was a cornerstone of everything. A foreign tech acquisition designed to redefine Thorn Enterprises' future. In the boardroom, surrounded by faces that had watched me grow up and climb to the top, the air turned sharp. "Julianne," my Uncle Walter said, breaking the tension, "are you absolutely certain there are no weaknesses in Falcon's core framework?" I kept my posture composed. "The system has been stress-tested repeatedly. There are no issues." "Then explain this," he said, sliding a document across the table. "Obsidian Capital pulled out yesterday. Their assessment states the model contains a fundamental logical flaw." The words hit like a blow. Obsidian's opinion shaped markets. Their withdrawal wasn't. Concern, it was condemnation. Before I could respond, the head of technology rose from his seat, sweat beading at his temples. "The core architecture," he said carefully, "was designed entirely by Mr. Cross. Large portions of it are locked behind proprietary encryption. Without his credentials, we can't access the foundational layer." The room stirred. "You're telling us," Walter said slowly, "that an assistant holds the keys to a multi-billion-dollar initiative?" His eyes locked on mine. "Julianne, perhaps you should explain how this happened." Every gaze in the room converged on me, curious, doubtful, some almost satisfied. My hands tightened beneath the table. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't imagined that Adrian would leave behind something so precise, so devastating. He hadn't simply walked away. He'd taken the heart of the project with him. I inhaled deeply and straightened. "I'll take responsibility," I said evenly. "This will be resolved." I turned to the tech director. "You have 3 days. Bring in whoever you need. Break it down and rebuild it." My voice was firm, but inside, something wavered. I knew this wasn't a problem money could solve. What Adrian created wasn't just code. It was an extension of how he thought. Back in my office, the hours blurred together as calls went out across continents. Renowned engineers, elite consultants. Every answer came back the same. Uncrackable, requires creator authorization, not feasible without original access. I dropped onto the sofa, the weight of it all finally pressing down. For the first time, the empire I'd built felt fragile, like glass under strain, and every crack traced back to one name. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't stop myself. I didn't want him back forever. I told myself that much. I just needed him long enough to finish Project Falcon. That was all. Nothing personal. I steadied my breathing and dialed a number I could recite without thinking. A pause, then a voice with no warmth, no emotion. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I stared at my phone. No longer in service. I checked the number again. Every digit was right, which meant he had changed it. Deliberately. Cleanly. Heat rushed to my face, sharp and humiliating. Anger surged first, violent, uncontrollable, followed by something colder, something I refused to name. He wasn't sulking. He wasn't waiting. He was cutting me off. "Sophie," I shouted. The door flew open. She nearly tripped coming inside. "Why, yes, Miss Thorne." "Find him," I said, my voice barely restrained. "I want to know exactly where Adrian Cross is. Right now. Use every channel. Every favor. I don't care what it costs." "Yes." Immediately. The hours stretched. Then days. Nothing. No travel records. No hotels. No financial trail. It was as if his existence had been erased. For the first time in my career, my network, politicians, bankers, private firms, came back empty-handed. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. On the second evening, just as my patience finally snapped, Sophie knocked again, clutching a thin folder with both hands. "Ms. Thorne, we found something." I took it from her instantly. There was only one line inside. Adrian Cross' last known location. Caldwell Estate. Repulse Bay, Hong Kong. My vision narrowed. The Caldwell Estate. I knew that name. Anyone at the top did. Old money. Power that didn't need publicity. A family whose influence ran quieter and deeper than mine. "No," I said under my breath. "That can't be right." Adrian Cross didn't belong in that world. He couldn't. The idea was absurd. He must have been working there in some minor capacity. A consultant, a temporary hire. Anything but. I stopped myself. Still, unease settled in my chest. The situation was moving in directions I hadn't anticipated, like seeing the edge of something massive beneath dark water, realizing too late how small the visible part really was. Before I could process it further, another crisis slammed into me. In one of Thorne Enterprises' main conference rooms, the atmosphere was suffocating. The Smart City core team sat around the table, drained, silent. I stood at the head, hands braced against the surface. Projected on the screen was a message from Vanguard Consortium. Cold, precise, merciless. They had reviewed our second revised proposal, and they hated it. The email dissected us line by line. Weak data, non-existent risk controls, incoherent logic. There was no room for interpretation. It was a rejection in everything but name. The project director cleared his throat, voice unsteady. "They've issued a final notice. If we fail to satisfy them at the final presentation next week, the partnership is terminated." He hesitated, then continued. "They also stated they will blacklist Thorne Enterprises permanently and notify the industry." The room went still. A blacklist from Vanguard wasn't just a lost deal. It was reputational poison. Clients would disappear. Partners would distance themselves. Years of credibility could collapse overnight. Murmurs broke out around the table. Fear, confusion, anger. Who were these people really? And why did they show zero tolerance? I listened without speaking, my expression darkening. 2 critical projects. 2 ticking clocks. And one man who held the answers to both. A man who had vanished, changed his number, and somehow ended up at the doorstep of a family powerful enough to make my own feel ordinary. For the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't coincidence. And Adrian Cross was no longer playing a role I had assigned him. The Smart City project wasn't just another contract. It was my signature. I had staked my reputation, my authority, everything on its success. If it collapsed, I wouldn't just lose a deal, I would lose my standing. That was not an outcome I was willing to accept. "Enough," I said sharply. The room went silent. I rose from my seat, my gaze sweeping across the exhausted faces around the table. "A crisis is nothing more than pressure revealing weakness," I said coolly. "And pressure is exactly how you prove what you're worth." I didn't pause. Effective immediately, all leave is suspended. Every member of this team is on full standby, day and night. We have 1 week. We win this bid. No excuses. No one cheered. No one looked inspired. They all knew the truth. The issue wasn't effort. It was direction. After the meeting dispersed, the project director lingered, then knocked on my door. "There's something you should know," he said carefully. I didn't look up. "Say it." "I've been reviewing Vanguard's rejection notes. Their logic, their critique style, it's familiar." I frowned and finally met his eyes. "Familiar how?" He hesitated. "It's almost identical to how Mr. Cross used to dismantle our internal proposals. The precision, the lack of mercy, the obsession with data integrity." Something cold slid down my spine. I reopened the rejection email and reread it slowly, line by line. The tone, the structure, the way every weakness was exposed without embellishment. Too precise, too clean. "No," I said quietly. "That's impossible." Adrian had been an assistant. Nothing more. The idea that he could be linked to a conglomerate like Vanguard Consortium was absurd. I shut the file. You're overthinking this. Focus on fixing the proposal. After he left, the office felt cavernous. My eyes drifted back to the report on Adrian's location. Caldwell Estate. Repulse. Bay. The unease returned, heavier this time. I realized, with a bitterness I couldn't ignore, that I had never truly known the man who worked beside me for 7 years, and that ignorance was beginning to cost me everything. What I didn't know then was that, while I was fighting to hold my ground, another meeting was taking place in Hong Kong, one that would decide the fate of the project long before the final bid. At a long table sat the elders of the Caldwell family. "This project is promise," one of them said, voice calm but firm. "But the mainland partner concerns us. Thorn Enterprises lack stability." Celeste Caldwell, seated at the head, turned slightly. "Adrian," she said, "what's your assessment?" All eyes shifted to him. Adrian stood unhurried and brought up a presentation. "Your evaluation is accurate," he said evenly. "Thorn Enterprises is the weakest variable." A murmur rippled through the room. "But that weakness," he continued, "is intentional. Thorn was never meant to be a partner. It's a stress point. Their missteps generate real-world failure data we can't simulate." Silence fell. "As for further investment," Adrian said, "I recommend proceeding, not for the project itself, but for contingency. When Thorn is eliminated at the final stage, we activate Plan B and transfer control to an internal firm." The elders exchanged looks. "Elegant," one finally said. "A live stress test and a seamless fallback." The decision was made. Later, as Celeste walked beside him, she asked softly, "And if Thorn somehow passes?" Adrian smiled faintly. "With me evaluating? Unlikely." Back in my world, I remained unaware. The next morning, an invitation arrived. Media, global press, final bid conference. Celeste Caldwell's name was everywhere. The weight of it hit me instantly. This wasn't a fair competition. It was a stage set by giants. Then came the rumors. Celeste Caldwell was engaged. No one knew to whom. The final days blurred into sleepless nights. I locked myself away, tearing apart models, rebuilding frameworks, trying, desperately, to think the way Adrian once had. And then the email arrived, a short announcement. To ensure the authority of the final proposal, the Vanguard Board appoints Mr. Adrian Cross as Chief Technical Advisor. He will hold veto authority. His assessment will be final. Attached, his resume. Ph.D. Artificial Intelligence. MIT. Lead architect on multiple global smart city projects. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, it had to be a coincidence. It had to be. I looked up slowly, my voice barely steady. "Find him," I said again. I wanted everything. Every record, every trace. "Dig," I told my team. "I don't care how deep you have to go. I want the full picture on Adrian Cross." 2 days passed. Nothing. No academic trail. No employment history. No social footprint. Aside from that unervingly sparse resume, he might as well not have existed. For the first time, I felt like prey, like something unseen was tightening around me. The night before the final bid, Thorn Enterprises glowed against the skyline. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, a glass of red wine warming in my hand. The city lights blurring below. We hadn't slept in days, but we had rebuilt everything from the ground up. The proposal on my desk was flawless. Or so I believed. A knock broke the silence. The project director stepped in, eyes bloodshot but bright. "Ms. Thorn, every figure has been rechecked. There's no weakness left." I smiled. "Then tomorrow we don't just win, we dominate." My phone rang. Unknown number. "Julianne," Ryan said, his voice tight. "I heard something tonight. About the Caldwell family. About Vanguard." I closed my eyes. "Say it." "They're saying the chief advisor is Adrian, and that he's engaged to Celeste Caldwell." For a moment, there was nothing. No sound. No thought. Then anger surged. Hot, violent, blinding. "So that's the game." I laughed softly, the sound chilling even to my own ears. 7 years at my side. Watching, learning, waiting. What about tomorrow? Ryan asked carefully. It goes ahead, I said coldly. I want to see how far he's willing to take this. The next morning, the final bid convened at the Ritz-Carlton. The hall buzzed with anticipation. I took my seat in a perfectly cut Armani suit, composed, unshaken. Ryan leaned close. You're calm. Why wouldn't I be? I replied lightly. Men who rise by hiding behind powerful women usually fall just as easily. When my turn came, I owned the stage. Every word landed. The applause was immediate. Then the host spoke. Please welcome the Vanguard Consortium's Chief Technical Advisor, Mr. Adrian Cross. The doors opened. He walked in with effortless authority, dressed in white, posture relaxed, presence absolute. He didn't look at me. Not once. He took his place as executives leaned toward him with unmistakable respect. This wasn't the man who once stood quietly outside my office. He lifted my proposal, uncapped a red pen, and marked 3 small points. Then he closed the folder and set aside. Conclusion, he said evenly, structural confusion, data integrity issues, risk modeling failure. I stood abruptly. That's false, I snapped. Every figure was verified. He didn't turn. It's comparable, he continued calmly, to the first framework I evaluated for her 7 years ago. The room went silent, and in that silence, everything I believed I controlled shattered at once. The words exploded in my head. In one sentence, he erased everything I had built, stripping it down to a borrowed reflection of his work. My knees buckled. The murmur of the crowd crashed over me, sharp and merciless, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely exposed. On stage, Adrian calmly set the pen down and rose. The announcement followed, cold and final. Thorne Enterprises had failed the evaluation. No, I shouted, rushing forward. You can't do this. This is personal. Security stopped me before I could get close. From the side, Celeste stepped forward, her presence composed, unshaken. She glanced at Adrian. Does it bother you? She asked softly. He shook his head once. He never looked at me. Let's go. They disappeared to the side entrance together. Cameras flashed. Voices swelled. I dropped to the floor, struggling to breathe, the world tilting violently out of reach. In that moment, I knew it was over. The fallout was immediate. By morning, the stock price collapsed. Lawsuits followed. Partners fled. The board demanded my resignation. The empire I'd ruled for years crumbled in days. 3 days later, I finally left my office. A senior assistant waited quietly and handed me a folder. This is the Vanguard Consortium shareholder breakdown, he said. At the top of the list was a name I recognized instantly. Cross Family Fund, controlling stake. My fingers went numb. They're the semiconductor giants, he continued. Near total control of the high-end chip market. Mr. Cross is the sole heir. The folder slipped from my hands. A hollow laugh escaped me. I had spent years looking down on him, never realizing I was the insignificant one. There's more, the assistant said gently. 3 years ago, he anonymously acquired our biggest rival to prevent a hostile takeover. And 5 years ago, he intervened when you were harassed at a bar. He needed stitches. Stop. I whispered, tears blurring my vision. He placed another document on the desk. This is my resignation, he said quietly. Ms. Thorne, he was never trying to enter your world. We were never part of his. He left me alone with the truth. 2 weeks later, Thorne Enterprises was bankrupt. Ryan was gone. The office was empty. At dusk, I sat in silence as the news played. A headline filled the screen, the wedding of the century. The image showed Adrian and Celeste standing together before a castle in France, radiant. He was smiling, not the restrained politeness I remembered, but something real, something free. I stared at the screen until my vision shook. I had lost the one person who had once seen me clearly, who had given without asking, and I was the one who drove him away. A broken laugh slipped out. The glass fell from my hand and shattered on the floor, the sound echoing through the empty office. A final, hollow punctuation to everything I had been.